converting your Starlink Dishy to run off 12 volt natively. Hi folks, I'm Roger from Offgrid, and we are producing a small series of videos that explain how to convert your Starlink Dishy to native 12 volt operation. As you might know, Starlink operates on a 48 volt system, so the router injects 48 volts down that 75-foot cable, which arrives at the dish, and the dish actually converts it to 12 volts in order to operate. There's a bit of circuitry down here, which I'll take you through later, that converts it to 12 volts. Now, we're doing these videos that will explain in detail the process of how you actually do this conversion. And the reason for it is because we've not seen anything on the internet that's end-to-end that shows this process. There are tons of videos that show the process of converting your Starlink using PoE with a 48 volt injection, that sort of thing. But we've not seen an end-to-end video showing the whole process from start to finish that show you how you actually achieve this. So obviously the first step, and in this episode, the first step is separating the real workings of Dishy, which is this, from the base unit. So we're going to be showing you how we did that. Very, very nerve-wracking, I have to say, because I don't recall seeing a close-up of exactly what we should expect. And there are a lot of people who managed to do this, obviously cut out the difficult parts that showed you how. What we did find was when we started this, we chose an area that had a lot of adhesive, and very effective adhesive. And one of the lessons we learned was you should actually just keep on working your way around until you get to several spots that don't have that much adhesive. And that's a good starting point. So that's the first bit of advice that I give.
Okay, folks, we had a bit of a technical difficulty with our mics when we first recorded this video, and turned out that we recorded the entire video with no audio, which is not awesome because here we are working with a voiceover. So hopefully this will still be helpful for you and you'll get something out of it. And I'll talk you through as we kind of go and figure this whole thing out. So I'll preface this with, we had no idea what we were doing here initially. We'd watched a bunch of YouTube videos. We'd spoken to folks that had done this sort of conversion before. So we had an idea of how others had done it, but it's very different to when you're actually getting after it and trying to open up and potentially break something that costs a few £100. And so obviously as soon as we start doing this, the warranty is void. So I'll just put that out there. If you're worried about the warranty, then don't go trying to split your dish apart. We started off by trying to wedge a very small flat screwdriver between the two, which then obviously split the bottom dome layer, split that lip off it. And then we thought, well, we'll try and I wonder what happens if we just follow that groove that we're now creating and work the seam by splitting that layer off, that lip. And we continued in this vein for a little while, and initially we'd kind of thought maybe this will sort of weaken it and it'll make it easier, one, to just see how the whole join hangs together, because that's one thing we could not find when we were researching this, is what does the join actually look like, what's involved in it, how is it held together, all that sort of stuff. And so this is part of us kind of investigating, is going through and checking how the join works. And we initially had thought we might do this all the way around, but soon what we discovered and found was that it actually would not work. It doesn't actually release the adhesive that holds the two layers together. It was just making a bit of a mess. It was slowly damaging the gray layer, which is really what we wanted to preserve. And obviously it was completely trashing the bottom layer, which we weren't that bothered about, but it's more just the preservation of the gray layer, which is what the dish is actually attached to. So that's what we were trying to preserve. But yeah, continued down this road a little bit. We started angling the screwdriver a little bit more to actually hit the dome part, as opposed to just working it down the seam and breaking that lip. Tried various things like smaller screwdrivers, and then obviously they just work their way underneath and break that lip even more. And then back to the bigger screwdriver, trying to get it into this gap and just create a gap to start getting some movement on getting the actual face of the dish off the dome part. And what we found is that this was not really working. We were obviously breaking that lip off the white bit, but it wasn't actually doing anything to reduce the strength of the adhesive that holds the two layers together. And so we continued down the path of trying to wedge something between the two layers to split them out. But clearly what this was doing was putting a lot of strain onto the corners and the edge of this plastic cover, but not necessarily putting any strain on the actual adhesive. So soon after this, we moved to a different tactic. So we raided the chisel box and hauled out a couple of chisels. And we'd seen some videos of guys that had a sort of wide flat surface or a wide flat tool. And what they did is they put it on the join, right where the white and the gray bit meet. And then they just tapped it to try and essentially break the adhesive inside, so that when they were able to get the two layers apart, it would come apart much easier. So we continued pretty much the whole way around doing this. So we started off with a wide one, and we weren't actually hitting it hard. We were literally using the back of a screwdriver just to tap it a little bit. When we first started, we actually used a mallet, and what we found was that it just was a bit too heavy and didn't feel like it was the right approach. And so we continued in this vein with a chisel, just tapping away to see if we could get some movement. One of the things that we realized was when we first started, we had obviously started in an area that had very strong adhesive compared to some of the other areas. So that kind of threw us off a little bit, because it was really tough to break open that section where we started with the screwdriver. And what we found is, as we started to get some progress in separating the layers, when we eventually went back, it was actually where we first started that held us up the most, and it was the bit that took the most time for us to actually get separated. And so we continued with the chisel, just tapping away all the way around. We would just roll the dish over and then just keep working our way. And about here on the other side is where we started to make some progress with actually separating the two. So we could see that the two were starting to separate. The adhesive was no longer holding it. It was getting much easier to wedge the chisel between the two layers. We'd also moved to a slightly smaller chisel as well, which we found more effective for this. But again, continued to work our way around. Interestingly, this area here is directly opposite the other side where we first started, and this also was very tough to get going. I think both this and its opposite side on the other side were the two areas that had the strongest adhesive and were the hardest to get open. But we continued in this vein, as you can see, just slowly separating the two layers. And by now, quite a good portion of the dish is actually, the adhesive is no longer holding. So we're able to actually open it up and see inside and see what's happening for the first time so far. And again, here, this bit's a little bit sticky, so we went back, continued down the bottom there, and then started separating it out and having a look and working the other side. Lots of turning it over and reworking. And again, back to this side here where we're getting some movement. We're kind of wedging the chisel in between there and using our fingers to push the two layers apart. Again, this section is pretty much still holding completely. And so then we moved to the top. We thought, well, we'll try and do everywhere and finish up that first bit where we started. And so carried on in the same process. So by now it's a little bit looser, and we can actually get the chisel in between the two layers and twist it so we can get some movement there. And again, this section here is holding really tight. And so we work it some more, get the chisel, tap, try and wedge it between the two layers. And actually we just did ourselves a disservice by breaking those bits off that one side, because by now there's no space to actually leverage between the two layers, which probably exacerbated how tricky it was. Eventually we found that it would be easier just to pull it down like that. Obviously we were careful that it wasn't actually twisting the layer that we wanted to keep, which was good. So there's going to be a reasonable amount of clear up and clean up required. So quite a bit of material was still attached to Dishy on the underside of the gray section here. And as you can see, this kind of shows you what it actually looks like, what that join looks like. So the grey section and the white section obviously kind of marry into each other. It's not just a flat surface that you can easily wedge something in between them. You really have to break the glue because the glue's got sort of angles which makes it much stronger than if it was just two flat surfaces that it was gluing together. And here is the dome part of the dish. So you can see what that looks like in a little bit more detail. But again, has a bit of a groove that the grey bit fits into, which gives it a very strong join.
So we finished getting this off, and it was really nerve-wracking. I must say I was quite nervous. I wasn't sure whether we were actually splitting this apart or we were taking it off properly. And at one stage I did think we were actually damaging this, that we were splitting it apart, but now that it's all off, we see we weren't splitting it apart and everything's looking good. So much lighter. This thing is actually, all the weight is in this here, and so we've got this off. The two plugs, one is for the motors, to operate the motors, and the other is for the internet, for the Cat5 connection. And yeah, so this is ready now. In the next episode we'll be going through the process of removing the electrics that convert the 48 back to 12 and showing you how you get 12 volt onto this board to use. So stick with us and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.